Welcome. I'm Lisa Bonnice, and my guest today is one of my favorite people to go down rabbit holes with, Paul Levy, who offers some of the most important information that humanity seems to be missing. Information that can turn everything around, the global madness and the separation, which all boils down to one thing: a sort of mind virus that goes by many names and is mentioned in recorded text throughout history, and which Paul calls by the name Wetiko. Paul Levy is the founder of the Awaken in the Dream community in Portland, Oregon. He's a longtime Tibetan Buddhist practitioner and the author of many books, including Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World, Undreaming Wetiko, and many others, including his newest release, The Quantum Revelation, which Sting endorses as mind blowing. Paul, welcome. So good to see you.
Yeah, hey, I'm so happy to be here with you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. Because as I've said to you so many times before, this is such important work. And nobody seems to, well, some people know about it, but it's not seen as much as it should be. And I think that one of the reasons that more people don't know about the mind virus is because, well, first, because one of its attributes is that it's an expert at remaining hidden, but also that it's sort of hard to wrap your head around. So, if you would, please give us the clearest explanation possible of the mind virus.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's funny, having to give an elevator speech like about something, I've written 3 books and I'm already part of the way through my 4th book on it because it's such a profound topic. But in essence, what a mind virus really has to do with is that the real source and the solution of the collective madness that our species is playing out is to be found within our psyche. And that's a no-brainer. Like, where else in the world could our collective madness be found? And every spiritual tradition throughout history has been pointing at the mind virus in different ways, just in different languages or symbols. And even visionary artists have been pointing at it. And they're pointing at it because it's the most important thing to see in the entire world. If we don't see it, there won't be a human species much longer. And for example, in the Castaneda books, Carlos's teacher, he doesn't have the name, he doesn't call it Wetiko, but he's teaching Carlos and he calls it, he has a number of different names, the flyers, the predator, but he says this is the topic of topics for shamans. And because what Wetiko is, by being a mind virus, it works through the unconscious, we all have blind spots, through our blind spots in such a way that we get entranced via our own mind's projections, via our own creative genius for creating our experience. There's no one else creating our experience for us. We are doing that by the way we're interpreting and we impute meaning onto the waking ink blot. The mind virus, one can think of it like it operates through our projective tendencies of the mind in such a way that we entrance ourselves and we hypnotize ourselves. And then we identify with who we're not. We disconnect from who we actually are, and we forget about and we aren't in relationship with our creative spirit. That's in essence what the mind virus. So the mind virus itself, for example, in the apocryphal text, they talk about Wetiko. They call it the counterfeiting spirit. But of course, it got edited out of the actual Bible because I point out that Wetiko was on the editorial board and made sure to edit it out because this mind virus cannot stand to be seen. When we see it, we take away its power and we become empowered, and then it becomes an unemployed mind virus. And so it'll do everything it can to remain incognito, to hide. And what my work is about is helping people to see it, to see how it's actually informing, and configuring events in our world so as to synchronistically reflect back what's happening in our minds. And it also affects how we actually react to what's happening. So that's one quantum system, what's happening in the world and how we interpret it and react. That's the arena for the mind virus. So then we project and we think our projections are real. We become conditioned by our projections, just even reacting unconsciously. that all of that is inspired by what can be conceived of as being a mind virus. So it's a very, in a way, even though it's really profound and multidimensional, it's very, very simple, and it induces in us a state in which we are disassociated from our nature and we've disconnected from our creative power, from our actual true nature. And then we become unwittingly an instrument for this mind virus, which you can think of as a higher dimensional entity. Then it operates through us. We become unwittingly the conduit for it to incarnate in our world. And all the while, we're oblivious. We think, oh, I'm just being myself, when in a sense, we've actually been taken over by something.
Yeah. Oh, as usual, so many questions are popping up in my head, but the one that's really pressing pressing through here is, as you're talking, it feels as if Wetiko may be sort of the the construction tool of physical reality. So if when we're not in our physical form, we're in this sort of afterlife paradise, where we can manifest at a moment's, just like that, and we're all unconditional love. And when we're on the physical earth, we can't seem to access that, but that's because we're in the physical world, and it almost feels like Wetiko is the solidified uh oh God, how can I, do you see where
No,
I'm going
I
with this?
totally see what you're pointing at. So in other words, this is where I bring in quantum physics, because what quantum physics, discovered about a century ago was really the solution for the mind virus. And that's what, hopefully I'll be getting across that today. Because what happens, one way to understand this, and the whole basis of my work is 40 plus years ago, I had this life transforming spiritual awakening that got me in deep trouble because I was so excited that I immediately got thrown in hospitals and pathologized and told, oh, you have a mental illness and you'll have this illness the rest of your life. But it was so clear to me what I was realizing that I never subscribed to that for a second. But the way the mind virus works, okay, if we see, because what I was awakening to was that we're having a collectively shared dream, that this is nothing other than a dream, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal sense. And that's what began happening for me. I began having that realization, and then things began happening in my life that were physically impossible. But what was shown to me over the course of 40 plus years is that, okay, here we're having a collectively shared dream, but we become so entranced in thinking that this world is objective, is solid, is separate, that being a dream, as soon as we assume that perspective, being a dream, this waking dream will instantaneously offer us all the evidence confirming our viewpoint that this world is objective and separate from us. And well, now we have confirmation, we have evidence that's showing us that, our viewpoint is correct. So we get even more fixed in seeing this world objectively and solid and other than ourselves. And being a dream, the more we assume that point of view, the more the dream will just give us all the evidence confirming our viewpoint in a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is within our own mind. And what I'm describing is we've actually hypnotized ourselves. And that's Wetiko. It's like we are a people under a spell. But there's no like witch or evil magician who's doing that. We are doing that to ourselves. And what I'm pointing out, to the extent that I've woken up out of my spell, and it's a continual, I'm a work in progress, like all of us. But to the extent we don't see through the spell, then we unwittingly are offering ourselves into the hands of this mind virus to unwittingly be an instrument to enact its agenda, which doesn't serve us, because its agenda is very sinister. But it's all part of what's in our psyche. It's all just our own energy.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So uh, as you're saying, it's this feedback loop, and you know that I'm really into ancestral healing, and so the way that I see this as, because we're coming up to this, almost like a breaking point, and it feels like humankind has, we started out sort of innocent and as a small population. And as we grew and as wars began and bickering among ourselves and all the strife that humanity has caused, it's grown so much, and our ancestors passed on their legacies and we continue to pass on their legacies. And so now with this huge population and this bubbling turmoil that we've all been feeding, is that Watiko? And if
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah,
is okay, so then is
yeah,
this the cause of this? I mean, we seem like we're under this sort of cloud of Watiko. It's
yeah, yeah,
splitting
yeah,
us
yeah.
apart.
Well, no, it's, I mean, it's in this mind virus, it exists in the collective unconscious, which means that potentially any one of us could fall prey to it at any moment. And who hasn't acted out their unconscious, at a given moment? We all have. And the thing about this mind virus, it's contagious because what Wetiko is, it's a collective psychosis. And we're in the complete middle of a collective psychosis right now. I mean, just look at what we're doing to ourselves, and we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet. And so one way of envisioning it is that in the alchemical sort of, if you think of the psyche as a vessel, alchemical vessel of the psyche, there's incredible pressure. We're all feeling it. A lot of people are just feeling stressed out or fear or anxiety, and all of that is food for the mind virus. And some people check out and go numb or whatever, and that's tragic. But if you're able to really consciously hold that creative tension, from that increased pressure in the psyche, out of that, we can potentially connect with our creative nature. Because what I'm pointing out is that, there are a lot of different ways of articulating what is the solution. Because the thing about this mind virus, it's quantum in nature. And what I mean by that, very simply, just like quantum physics discovered, what is the nature of light? Well, sometimes it manifests as a wave, sometimes as a particle. You couldn't imagine more contradictory states than a wave and a particle. And yet they realize, they empirically prove this again and again, that how light manifests, it depends on how it's observed. So similar with Watiko. Watiko is the source of the most incredible evil that we play out within our own minds, we play out in relationship, we play out collectively as a species on the world, and holographically hidden, encoded within the mind virus is its own vaccine, is its own medicine. And not only that, not only does it contain its own cure, it is literally helping us, it's catalyzing us to awaken. If this mind virus didn't exist, we would have to invent it. It's helping us to tap into our divine inheritance that we're more than happy to just ignore or marginalize, and it's a known thing just in psychology that the psyche then, consciousness expands when there is a necessity, when there is a need. And there's an incredible need right now. The times we are living through, these are very dangerous times. And, the darkness, what people can call evil, is like coming out from hiding underground or in the corners, and it's right in our face. And but what I'm pointing out is that, yeah, there's a revelation hidden, encoded in the darkness. Instead of like in the time of Christ, that the revelation was coming through one human being from heaven in a beam of light. No, this revelation is coming from the underworld, from, in the darkness. I mean, just one thing, if I could quote Jung, uh, the great psychiatrist, he says, the great problem of our time is we don't understand what's happening. And then he clarifies what is happening is we are encountering the darkness of the soul, the darkness of the unconscious. And I point out, and I finished this article right before the pandemic, the lockdown, our species is making a collective descent into the underworld, just like a shaman. And who is the shaman? It's the wounded healer. It's the storyteller. It's the dreamer. It's the creative artist. So to circle back, the solution for this mind virus, one can say, oh yeah, connecting with your nature, connecting with compassion, seeing the dreamlike nature, connecting with the non-local field, with the quantum, all of those are ways of describing it. another way of describing it is connecting with our creative spirit, because that is our nature. When people say, oh, the greatest protection is to connect with your true nature. Great, but that's such a cliche. What does that even mean? What is our true nature? Well, our true nature by its nature is creative. What that means is that when you have realization of your nature, you embody being creative. You express yourself creatively. And the more you do that, the deepen is your realization of your nature in a positive feedback loop that creates light upon light in a world of darkness. That's why it's profoundly important for us to, each one of us, to connect with our creativity. Because one final thing about the mind virus, it's called the counterfeiting spirit, like I said in the apocryphal text. It's a master impersonator. It puts us on. If we're not awake, it'll offer us a fictitious version of ourselves. Oh, I'm traumatized, I'm wounded. And as soon as we step into that identity, into Watiko's limited identity, then it has us. Then it will give us all the evidence we need to confirm, oh, I really do have a problem. I really am wounded. But the thing is, if we actually connect, you see, the thing about Watiko, it's a master impersonator, but it has no creativity at all. It plugs into our unconscious creativity. And I should add, the greatest poison in the human psyche is repressed creativity. So if we're not actively expressing ourselves creatively, this mind virus plugs into our own creative genius, turning it against us to serve its agenda.
Mhm. Right. That makes so much sense. So then the next question out of many is if we're talking about what's happening in the world today, let's just talk about the United States because otherwise the
Sure.
picture just gets so huge. Politically, we have basically two sides, and I'm not going. I don't want to get partisan or anything, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a fact. Two sides really hating each other, and
Right,
each side refusing to admit that they're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. No,
right,
I'm right, you're wrong.
right, right.
And so
Yeah,
if
yeah, yeah.
somebody is really in a bad place and yet they feel so right, they feel like they are
Yeah,
expressing their,
yeah,
but
yeah,
in
yeah.
actuality they're feeding
Yeah,
the
yeah,
mind
yeah.
virus.
Well, this is, yeah, yeah. If I can point out, you see, the thing about this mind virus is, one of the ways, one of the, yeah, how come it's so hard to see is because it's so obvious. Okay. So it's an inner disease of the soul that exists within us, within our psyche. And yet it has a magical ability to somehow extend itself out in the world and configure seemingly external events. I'm talking events, world events, so as to reveal and express itself. So just think about what I just said. It's an inner disease that expresses itself through the medium of the outside world. That's just like a dream, where the inner is the outer. Now, going back to, in his work, Carl Jung talks about the sickness of our time. The sickness of our time is a sickness of disassociation, where one hand does not know what the other hand is doing. Think about what I just described about Watiko. It's an inner disease of the soul that manifests through the medium of the external world. That inner disease of disassociation, of fragmentation, is getting dreamed up into a completely polarized world where the outer is reflecting the inner. But what Jung says is that that disassociation is also deep down, it's like a pregnancy. Something is potentially being born out of that disassociation. And it all depends if each of us as individuals are able to hold that creative tension, because we as microcosm are not separate from the macrocosm. And if we're able to not split and disassociate from that incredible creative tension and hold those opposites, out of that something emerges, something creative. His work, Jung calls it the transcendent function, the reconciling symbol. Those are two of his phrases for it. And if I could just say one more thing about the political thing without getting partisan, each side is like, oh no, we're in possession of the truth and you're wrong and all that, to the point where when you amplify that as a dreaming process, they both want to kill each other. And that's what's playing out. Well, the underlying dynamic from the psychological point of view that underlies Watiko is projecting the shadow. And interesting, in his work, Jung calls projecting the shadow the lie. And who is the liar symbolically? It's the devil. The point is that somehow evil is playing out in our world through the process of shadow projection. And here's a very simple way of understanding it. Say if I'm in a dream and I'm, not connected with my own shadow. Okay, so I've split off from my own shadow. Well, being a dream is just my own, psyche, just manifesting as the dream. Guaranteed that in the dream will come in a person or a group of people who will embody my own split off darkness. And they're like the carriers of my own shadow. And now all of a sudden I have evidence, oh, the evil really is out there, And so I get even more entrenched in I'm identified with I'm just light and goodness and I'm a victim and the evil and the problem is out there. And of course, being a dream, the more I project that out into the dream, the more the dream will just reflect back my very point of view. And then when you amplify that dreaming process, well, what do I want to do? When you really amplify it, I want to kill them, right? And what is that? That is an outer reflection of the initial inner process of projecting from my own inner shadow, my own inner darkness, that I want to exterminate. That I want to get rid of it. So it gets projected out and appears out there. So what am I describing? My inner situation of wanting to destroy my own darkness to the extent I don't own my darkness and recognize it, then gets played out through the medium of the outside world in such a way that I want to kill the person who's carrying my own shadow. And by doing that, I am literally possessed by the very evil I'm trying to destroy. That's insanity. That is a description of Watiko, and that's actually the diagnosis of what's playing out on the world stage.
Okay. So what do we do about it?
Yeah. Well, that's the question, and I go back to the work of Jung, and he again and again points out that the solution is to be found in the individual, in each one of us, that it's not something, oh, let's just create a new law or like collectively. No, when our species gets together in collective groups, Jung points out so many countless times that, it's like that group becomes, in his words, one big fat head. That's a phrase of his. The idea being that the individual is the carrier of life. And any one of us seeing our shadow, seeing the dreamlike nature, seeing Watiko, connecting with the quantum, cultivating compassion. There are a lot of ways of saying the same thing. And I've been studying Jung's work for over 40 years, and it's only been the last year or two that I've realized, oh my God, Jung was super switched on to, in very simple terms, the 100th monkey phenomena. He would use an example of when you take grains of sugar and you just put them in a glass of water one by one, you just dissolve each grain, it'll dissolve, it'll reach the saturation point. You add one more grain of sugar and a crystal will manifest. And he points out that's the ways that symbols crystallize in the psyche. And what are symbols there? It's the language of dreaming, but it's also, he's pointing out that any one of us having realization in this moment could be that grain of sugar that catalyzes an awakening in the collective unconscious of our species. So, just taking that in, and quantum physics in its own way is saying the exact same thing. That's really inspiring, because the big danger right now is for us to fall into depression or despair or feeling hopeless. And yeah, as one person out of 8 billion, yeah, what can I do, right? And yet quantum physics comes along and points out that each one of us have unimaginably vast creative power at our disposal right now. But to the extent that we're not aware of it, then this mind virus plugs into our own genius and turns it against us.
Right. Okay. So what's coming to mind, among many things, is I've been using the heart math method. They've got this amazing sensor where you can see your heart coherence, and they use this phrase called feeding the field. So when you are coherent, you're tapped in, and you are feeding the quantum field with you know tuned in love energy. And I'm wondering, as you're talking, is this what you're talking about? If we can tap into our inner isness and really just
Yeah, yeah,
expand
yeah.
that.
No, totally, totally. No, what that is so great because as you were describing the heart math thing, I was thinking, yeah, like when we're in our true nature, we have the realization we're here to be in service. And, and when we're actually helping other people or helping the field or being in service to the field, we are part of that field. So we're getting as much benefit as anyone else. And, it brings me to the key, one of the essential, like the essence of the mind virus is identifying with who we're not. So, if we identify with a separate self, with an ego, then all of a sudden, if I'm identified as being a separate self, then you're an other. And as soon as you're an other, there's fear. And fear is the superfood for Watiko. So the idea, like one way of describing, of dissolving and healing the mind virus, which can appear unbelievably powerful, but is actually feeble when you see it. I'll just do a little footnote right here. In in the Holy Quran of Islam, the holy book of Islam, all throughout the book, when the last of the surah, the verses, what do? They warn about Watiko. And what do they call it? They call it the slinking prompter. And in other words, it prompts us to react. It prompts us to maybe act out our shadow, to act out evil. But they call it slinking, and it'll manifest really scary and terrifying and all powerful. But it's called the slinking prompter because when you see it, you realize it's feeble. It only has power because it's plugging into your power that you're unwittingly giving it. You see, Watiko can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving our soul away. But when you see it, that's why my whole work is devoted to trying to help people to see it. Then you realize, oh, it is powerless. It's like the same thing with a vampire. If you don't, if the vampire isn't feeding off of you, it has no power on its own. It'll just shrivel up and die. And Watiko is like a vampire. So the point is to circle back. The essence of Watiko is to identify with who we're not, i.e., with a separate self. When you see through that, you see, as soon as I think that I'm a separate self, then I also think something else. I think the world exists objectively. And if the world exists objectively, well, then I must be a subject that's separate from the world. And this is where quantum physics comes in. We can talk about that in a moment. But the idea is when you see through the imagination of the separate self, what do you realize? You have the realization that we're interconnected with each other, that we depend on each other for our own well-being. And out of that realization springs compassion. And compassion is kryptonite for the mind virus, you know? And yeah, and that's to really connect with our true nature, our true self, which is not separate. And of course, then we're wanting to serve other people because other people are ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. An example comes to mind. I went to have some blood drawn at the lab recently, and as I was chatting with the phlebotomist, it became very clear that this person voted for the other side. And but in otherwise, we were having a perfectly lovely conversation, very kind, compassionate person, and I could have chosen to go, "Oh, you
Right.
voted for that person," but instead, allow that to just be a really sweet moment.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally. At each and every moment, we are offered by the universe at each and every moment to like make that choice of like concretizing somebody or the world or ourselves, and then reacting to our concretization as if it's real. And then, we ourselves are colluding with our own victimization. And then we've fallen back into samsara, the endless wheel of, death and rebirth, of suffering and all that. Or that same moment comes up and we can have the recognition, oh, this is just a display of my mind. And then all of a sudden you're at choice. Oh, how do I relate to this perception, to this thought form? Do I want to think it's actually real? Well, there might be some benefit to that. Or do I just see? No, no, no. I don't. I can choose to see things differently and all that. All you see, we have this incredible, our nature has, it interfaces with freedom. And interestingly, with all my study on evil, because, I'm pointing out that and I'm not talking evil in like this like sort of theological, sort of metaphysical sense. I'm talking psychological evil. That's what Jung, he really helped me in that way. And if people, because there can be all these debates, well, is evil real or just an illusion or the absence of good and all this, but psychological evil is as real as you can get. I mean, think about people acting out their addictions in a way that are killing themselves. Well, if we can't call that evil, because one way of understanding the word evil, whatever the opposite of when we integrate, well, when we disintegrate, when we fragment, you could say, oh, that's the spore print of something evil. And and somehow there's a connection between the appearance of evil in our world and us having the capability of attaining our freedom. And so many teachers, Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, Jung, they're all pointing at that there's this mysterious correlation between the manifestation of evil and of us attaining the freedom of our nature. And I'm pointing out that, and not just me, I'm translating Jung, that he says, yeah, there's something hidden, encoded in this evil, in this darkness, that is most important for us to know. And if we just keep it out there, and that's the polarization, oh, I'm just light and good, and I'm a victim, and the evil's out there, then that point of view is feeding the mind virus. But if we have the recognition that, oh, that person I experience as evil, that's my projection. And oh, what about if I'm looking in a mirror? And interesting, etymologically, the word mirror means holder of the shadow. What if I recognize that person who I see as like epitomizing evil is reflecting that part of me? Then by doing that self-reflection, that's where I'm on the right path. But as long, you see, the way this mind virus operates, it distracts us. So we put our attention outside. So we think the problem is outside. So we think the solution is outside. And then meanwhile, it hides within us. The point is to like bring our awareness in the moment. There's something in our psyche. I'll just have, this is important. Some like spiritual people get all edged out by the talk about evil, right? Oh no, I don't want to give evil any attention. Great. If you don't give evil any attention, it'll kill you. Because by you avoiding and turning a blind eye to evil, that's feeding evil. But if you actually become fascinated with it, that feeds it too. What I'm pointing out is seeing how it works, seeing how this mind virus operates by configuring events in the world and our own unconscious reactions. And then when you see it, you actually are at choice. You're like, oh, well, I see you. And now being a sovereign being, I get to choose where I place my attention. And instead of being overly focused on the evil, I can actually place my attention in creating the world I want to live in. That is kryptonite to Watiko. And just one final thing, people think, oh no, we just want to focus on love and light. I'm like, yeah, great. That's the number one strategy of the mind virus, because then you're not bringing your light to the darkness, which is the purpose of light, is to illumine darkness. And I think of in Tibetan Buddhism, the greatest of the bodhisattvas. He wrote the classic book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. My Lama, when I asked him, if you were on a desert island, what would be the one book you would take? And he right away said, oh, The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. Shantideva is considered the epitome of the bodhisattvic ideal. And what is the book about? Shantideva is saying, there's something in my mind that's doing black magic, that's making me asleep, that's numbing my mind. What is that? That's Watiko. And that's the profound importance of us shedding light on that, because when you shed light on that, it becomes powerless. But if you turn a blind eye, no, 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 I don't want to focus on that, then you've unwittingly given yourself over to the hands of the mind virus.
Right. Okay. So we're talking basically about spiritual bypassing here. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
yeah, yeah. No, there's so much spiritual bypassing. I know so many, really good-hearted, very bright people, great intentions, spiritual practitioners. And it just freaks me out when, when I see all the creative ways they spiritual bypass, you
Mhm.
know.
Okay. And again, 1,000 questions, but what's forefront of my mind as you were talking, um, if, if someone has suffered tremendous abuse over their lifetime, they've
Yeah, yeah,
been
yeah.
the victim, they've been abused, and
Yeah,
now they have the mindset that, they're useless, they're garbage, they're whatever the abuser has filled their
right,
head with.
right, right.
How do people who are dealing with something like that, how do they come out from under this? I mean, it almost feels like a cement, wall of Watiko
Yeah, yeah,
holding
yeah,
them
yeah, yeah,
down.
totally. Totally. No, that's a question close to my heart because I went through that big time. Without going into the story, because the way abuse works, I think about myself, there was the historic moment of abuse or, a number of moments, and then the abuser exits stage left. But what makes abuse is that we internalize the abuser and we then play that role. We oppress ourselves. And yeah, so that happened to me like so big time that it literally, I went from being a happy, healthy, person, to all of a sudden not being able to live my life, not being able to even take a step. I was like completely stopped in my tracks. And it was because of like a really amplified, experience of that, of, internalizing the trauma, the abuse, the wounding. And I went so inwards, to really begin to connect with the nature of my own mind, because what you discover is that abuse, so the abusers, he or she, they've exited stage left. Clearly, it's something now that we are unconsciously doing to ourselves. And when I would be like, really experiencing this, it was like, oh my God, I feel crazy. Like, why? Why? It's like I have myself in a headlock and I'm giving myself noogies and I'm like screaming in pain. I'm going like, what's going on? Well, ultimately, I'm doing this to myself, but I don't know I'm doing it to myself. So when you really bring light into that internal process, you discover something, and you discover that that's a process that's happening each and every moment to the extent it is happening. It's not just something that happened in the past and you're just a victim of what happened in the past. No, you are somehow unconsciously participating in the evocation of that moment of abuse, and another way of saying that is you discover, wow, I'm actually colluding with my own abuse. What's that about? And more as you bring light to that, you discover that in that moment of abuse coming up, in that exact instantaneous moment, you have a choice. You have a choice of interpreting that moment of your internalized abuse as evidence. Oh, I really am abused. So then you identify with being wounded and a victim of trauma. And the more you identify in that way, the more you're gonna, dream up more evidence confirming your viewpoint. Or if in that moment, that same moment of the abuse manifesting, if you're awake in that moment and you have the realization, oh wow, this is just a display of my mind, not separate from my own awareness, I'm actually participating in the creation of this experience, and you begin to discover and shed light on the part of us that's complicit in our own abuse. And that's where you're beginning to access your own creative agency. And of course, that can only be found in the present moment. It's not something that one does even 2 moments later. No, you have to develop. That's why the importance of developing mindfulness, of really just being present with your process, with your own mind, with your own pain and all that stuff. And, it's so much easier to blame out there and to become the victim, but to actually bring the light of your own awareness and to see, how am I participating in my own abuse, in my own victimization? That's the way to unlock that. And then once that energy becomes unlocked, that, previously was just funneled into compulsively recreating your trauma, all of a sudden, guess what? That energy becomes available for expressing love, compassion, and creativity.
Yeah, yeah. As you were talking, it reminded me of the first time that I recognized Wetiko. I mean, I grew up my whole life not ever hearing of this, and then I found your work, and the moment that I realized, Oh, oh, that it's all Watigo. And I just felt so, I felt this explosion in my heart of just, oh my God, this is so freeing. And then, of course, it fades and life comes back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How do we, I guess,
Yeah.
hang on to that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the question. That's a real question. And interestingly, in Tibetan Buddhism, the word, the idea of to meditate, the word meditation actually means to become familiar, right? And the idea is, like, I think of, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, and I'm not trying to talk anybody into becoming a Tibetan Buddhist, but the idea is the fundamental essence of the practice, because I know it so well, is you get introduced to your nature, and your nature is free, is always available. It's like one beautiful symbol of it. It's like if you have this mirror, the reflections, the object that the mirror is reflecting, we see the reflections and react to the reflections, or we absorb into the reflections and identify with them, or we contract against them, but we don't notice the mirror that underlies the reflection. And the mirror is always the same. It doesn't get tainted or stained by the reflection. It just effortlessly just reflects back whatever is put in front of it. And it's always pure and it's always available. But we don't see it. You see, in alchemy, they talk about the philosopher's stone as being invisible. The mirror is invisible. If there's no object to reflect it, you can't see it. So you put an object there, the reflection seems to obscure the silver surface of the mirror, but it's actually revealing the mirror. You wouldn't notice the mirror without the reflection. Okay. So the idea being in Tibetan Buddhism, you get, or in any tradition, I think the same, you get introduced to your nature, your mirror-like nature that's always with you, that's always available, and you become more and more familiar with that. You are able to stabilize that, and then everything that arises in your whole field of awareness. Oh, the pain in my body. Oh, my emotional upset. This thought, that perception. It's all just a display of awareness. And you don't have to, just like a reflection, you don't have to cling to it. You don't have to identify with it. You don't have to judge it or contract against it. You can just recognize it's just the play, the display of my awareness. And more and more, you begin to, in a natural way, just stabilize that familiarity with your nature, such that everything that arises is seen through that lens. And then even the worst, trauma or wounding, instead of obscuring you, it's actually catalyzing you to deepen your realization, and that's what spiritual practice is.
Mhm. Wow. I think this would be an excellent time to bring up the fact that you've got a Shift Network course coming up very soon where people can actually, be with you live and ask questions and participate, etc. And you've taught a few classes previously, but you've got a new one coming up. What's this class going to be about?
Yeah, well, it's funny because the month or two before, I began having these visions of, oh, because I have all these groups I lead for 30 plus years, but they're, like 10, 12 people. And I was realizing, well, I think I need to start teaching, to get the word out to more people, because what I'm trying to transmit, this is medicine. And this medicine came out of my own unbelievable struggle with my own trauma and struggle with evil and abuse and all that. And so then I was realizing, well, I'm gonna, start to create my own classes in the fall. And right when I was having that vision, Shift gets in touch with me. I hadn't heard from them for a couple of years, and they say, Paul, you're the perfect person. We want you to teach a course on how to navigate times of darkness. And I said to them, and it's like a really cool thing to teach at Shift. You can get a big audience. And I said, well, I will only do that if I don't have to write any curriculum, because the idea of writing a curriculum, that felt really constraining. And I wanted to be just like today. I had no idea what I was going to say, but I've learned, yeah, what I'm trying to bring forth is you can just trust in the moment and be a conduit with good intention, and then what you need to say is going to be on your tongue. And to Shift's credit, they agreed. They said, okay, we want you to teach this course. You don't have to write a curriculum. You can just show up. And that really speaks to me, just like in this interview today. Yeah, whatever's current in my mind, whatever's happening in the world, whatever's happening in the field between us, I want to be able to tap into that and express that. And yeah, so I'll be doing a shift thing, in a couple months. Like I think it's a 7-week class. And and one of the key things, I mean, I want to really help people to awaken to the dreamlike nature, because when you see the dreamlike nature, that opens up everything. That just unlocks the most sublime creativity. And creativity is the medicine, is the solution, for the mind virus. And yeah, I just feel really privileged and honored to be given that platform to share, because I know this is stuff that has healed me and it's helping so many people. And I'm just, really happy to be able to offer it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you're coming back. Now, your website is awakeninthedream.com. So anybody who's interested in the class will be able to find it there. And you also do session work. Is that where people can connect with you to work one-on-one?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know I'm not a therapist at all. I want to make that clear. And so many of my clients are therapists or psychiatrists, they're Jungian analysts. So that's just really, really interesting, And yeah, people, they'll read my work, they'll hear me talk, they'll feel inspired. And I think they recognize, oh yeah, Paul is somebody based on his own experience. In a way, because I always struggled, like, yeah, like what do I call myself? And then once I understood, like, oh yeah, there's the healer who's wounded, the wounded healer, that's when I realized, oh yeah, that's what I am. And I think people, they'll come across my work because we're all wounded healers in training. And what is the wounded healer? It's the shaman. What is the shaman? It's the storyteller, the dreamer, the artist, the creative artist. And I think people can see, oh yeah, I'm just sort of embodying that to whatever degree I'm able. And that's contagious. When people see that and you connect with somebody like that, it can activate that same, energy in you. And so there are two things I want to circle back to. One is like, the quantum physics thing, I want to bring in at a certain point before we end, because it's the medicine for what you go, but also the shaman piece, because I point out that the number one archetype activated in the collective psyche right at this moment in time is the shamanic archetype. And, a person would never in a million years make a conscious choice to be a shaman. You'd have to be absolutely out of your mind, because the suffering is so intense. But the shamanic archetype is something we are called, by the spirits or by our, inner voice. And the key thing is to assent. When you get called, to say, okay, I will agree to this. If you don't assent, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, that's when the would-be shaman gets really sick. Okay. And what happens when you agree to the calling? Invariably, you make a descent into the darkness of the unconscious, into the underworld, right? And that's, a situation that can be like this, it's, I guess the danger is one can get caught in that and never come out. That would be tragic. But the idea is the archetypal descent is into the darkness of our own being, of who we are, our own shadow, not just personal, but archetypal shadow. And then the myth of the shaman is that at a certain point, the shaman comes back to this world and they come back bearing gifts. And the gifts are a result of their initiatory ordeal. And the gifts are the gift of being creative. And all of us are being called. We are all would-be shamans. We are all would-be wounded healers. And I'm pointing out that when we then, as an individual, embody that and connect with other people who are also switched on in that way, then in a sense, that can go viral. That's a contagious energy, just like COVID was contagious. You know, this realization of awakening to the dreamlike nature, of connecting with our creative spirit, of having the recognition of who we actually are and that we can help each other. When you see that, you discover something. And what you discover is that we can get in phase with each other in such a way that we dream ourselves awake, that we can literally help each other to wake up. And that, another way of saying that, that is to realize that we can consciously step into and participate in our own evolution. And that's what this is all about. And if we don't do that, then we're fated to destroy ourselves, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, you also have, in addition to the class, you have something coming up in September. Talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the September thing, that was what I was at first envisioning before Shift got in touch with me. Every 2 weeks, I'm thinking right now, I mean, it might change, but I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I'll just give an hour and a half, just class where I show up just like today, and I might give a little teaching of whatever's on my mind. But then I really enjoy the interactive parts. I want to open it up for a Q&A. And I don't want to know any questions beforehand because I just love the spontaneity of, being challenged and then trying to, engage and discover what is the answer to that question. And that, at a certain point, we'll have info on that up on my website, you know. Um, but then if it's okay, I want to circle back to quantum physics because that's something I just came out with a new book.
Yes.
I think you showed it
Here we
before.
are. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually, I
yeah,
wanted to ask you about it. So this is perfect. What was
yeah,
the purpose for releasing this specific information at this specific time?
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, the first edition came out, I think it was 2018. And then I just thought, okay, great. I've written my quantum physics book. And then I kept on getting downloads. And quantum physics, just in essence, because so I'm not a physicist, but in a way that's to my advantage because I can then articulate this stuff in a way that really ordinary people understand. Quantum physics, see, it's very controversial. A lot of people are fighting, what does it mean and how do we interpret it? But the one way it's not controversial that everybody, I think, agrees on this is that it's considered to be the greatest discovery ever in all of human history in the realm of science. And just to give context, before quantum physics came on the scene about a century ago, physicists thought that this world existed objectively separate from them, and they were just passively observing it and studying it, trying to understand how does this world work. And then quantum physics comes along, and it empirically proved that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe that we're observing, right? Think about that for a moment. That's a description of a dream. So these quantum physicists who are all like struggling, they're all saying, yeah, we haven't found the central idea of quantum physics. They say it's like if you've never seen an automobile and you're walking in a forest and you see an automobile and you're like, what is this? Oh, let me turn on the turn signal. Let me turn on the radio. Oh, these lights go on. Oh, the heater goes on. Well, they still haven't found the central idea of what an automobile is really about. That's what the quantum physicists have been saying. And they're all saying, yeah, we haven't found the main idea. And here I am, and I'm saying, yeah, I'm not a physicist at all. And I would offer the main idea is that it's literally showing us, it's proving empirically that we are having a collectively shared dream. And that's what my book is about. And just to go down that rabbit hole a little bit further, once you realize the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed, that is showing you something. That's showing you that the act of perception, the act of observation is itself creative. We're not passively observing something out there. No, by the way we are interpreting the inkblot, the way we impute meaning on it. So in quantum physics, the way they set up the experiment, the questions they asked, the way they interpreted the data determined the answer they got back, right? So here quantum physics has proven that the act of observation is creative. And it's also the greatest discovery of the 20th century. These physicists are saying is we've discovered the universe is malleable, that it's not set in stone, and that it's a function of our mind. In other words, that the opposites in mind and matter, quantum physics has actually discovered that they so interface that they can't even be thought of as being separate. Because in a quantum universe, there's no separate things interacting at all. No, it's all one seamlessly interconnected quantum whole system, that there's no separate parts to anything. Okay. And that's the rabbit hole, because when you have the realization of that, you discover that, oh my God, I am creating my experience. each and every moment, my experience of myself, my experience of the world. No one else is, whatever's happening is happening. I'm the one, by the way I'm interpreting the waking ink blot, that's actually creating my own experience. That's to start to reconnect with our own intrinsic creative genius. Okay. And so another way of understanding quantum physics, there are two other points. Quantum physics has proven, empirically proven, there's no such thing as an objective world, and that is just an idea in our minds with no correlate in reality, right? And what that means is profound, because when you realize there's no objective world, what happened to the subject? If I'm thinking of myself as a subject, I need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. If there's no object, who am I as subject? Okay, so quantum physics is unwittingly promoting itself to become a spiritual path, but it's even more than that, because when you realize, wait a second, there's no objective world out there, who is the subject? You discover something. You realize that that subjective experience of being an ego, a separate self, and that subjective experience of thinking there is an objective world out there reciprocally co-rise and reinforce each other. Like one illusion reinforces the other. It's like David Bohm, the great physicist, calls this an illusion generating illusion. And what I'm pointing out is when you see through that illusion, that cuts all the rest of the illusions along with it. And that's when you begin to connect with your nature. Okay. And one other thing with quantum physics that's so mind-blowing, you see, they were trying to find what is the microstructure, what are the building blocks of this universe. And the more they went down in scale, the more they didn't find anything having at all to do with matter. They found consciousness. Okay, so they came up with this idea of an elementary particle. These are the building blocks of the whole universe, including what we're made of. And what is the nature of these elementary particles? Physicists say, well, they exist in every and any potential state they ever could up until the moment that they're observed. And then one of their states actualizes into manifestation, and all the other potentialities vaporize into parallel universes. And the very next moment, same thing. Infinite, possibilities, or nearly infinite, who knows? And then the moment of observed, one of them actualizes. And what that means is mind-blowing, because what that means is that even if one of those potentialities, that's, to quote a quantum physicist, highly ridiculously improbable, could be the very universe that manifests in this very moment. Okay, and what that means is that the fact that our species could actually awaken, that there could be sufficient numbers of us, maybe even one person right now awakening to their nature, could be the catalyst that activates a collective awakening in our species. Quantum physics is saying that is completely within the realm of the possible. And I would add, and if you're not envisioning that, then what in the world are you thinking? You see, the idea is that when you take in, this is like the rigorous, hardest core scientists who are proving that this is the nature of our situation. That engenders incredible hope, because the great danger is for us to get into depression, despair, pessimism, and then being a dream, if we're holding a pessimistic attitude, we're going to attract all the evidence confirming our pessimistic attitude in a self-reinforcing feedback loop. And the prize we win is that we're screwed, And so quantum physics is saying, no, don't do that. That's to put your hands in the hands of the mind virus. Actually see, it's not like, oh, one day we'll get the solution. No, we already have the solution. We are the solution. We just don't recognize it. That's what my work, and keep in mind, I'm a work in progress like all of us. But to the extent that I'm more and more, I'm able to stabilize my own recognition of my nature, of the dreamlike nature, of the nature of our situation, then the more I'm able to be of help and be in service. And that's true for all of us. So quantum physics is offering us the medicine for the illness that our species is suffering from. And one final thing, just to give a sense of how profound quantum physics is, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have these things called the hidden treasure, and and the idea, every spiritual tradition has this idea. The idea is that hidden, encoded within the multidimensional fabric of the universe are these spiritual treasures that help us to wake up, right? And in Tibetan Buddhism, they've codified this. It's called terma. the terma tradition, the hidden treasure tradition, the tradition I do practice to, it regenerates itself and keeps itself fresh because these new terma are continually discovered. And so one way of understanding this, say if the community gets a little bit one-sided and stale, right? There'll be a terma discovered, and it'll be whether it's a new practice or a blessed object or a new vision. And then the person who discovers the terma has to do the practice themselves and have realization before they're empowered to be able to share it, because these terma are a dreamed up phenomena. They're meant to be shared. And a way to understand this, they're like alarm clocks that are hidden in the fabric of the dream. They're like keys that open locks or like charms that break spells. And quantum physics, I'm pointing out, is a modern day analog to a terma. It's like we have dreamed up quantum physics to like show us. It's like when an individual person falls asleep and gets one-sided, what happens? They have a dream, and in the dream is a symbol. And if they get in resonance with the symbol, they'll get back to being in balance. That's what a terma does. And I'm pointing out that we have dreamed up quantum physics into our world and into our minds as a terma to help us, to show us, to get over the objective reality hangover is what I call it, and to realize the dreamlike nature. That's what quantum physics is openly revealing to us. And as more and more of us have that realization and become lucid in the waking dream, we can change the dream. That's what this is all about.
We could each be that grain of sugar. Wow.
Completely. Totally.
Wow. You know what? I think we should we can't top that. So let's go ahead and end there. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, Paul. The rabbit hole got deep and I love it here. I so appreciate you and the important work you're doing. Once again, the quantum revelation. To me, this is like the modern day version of the holographic universe, which was a mind-blowing book.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah. I just love Michael Talbot. Yeah. I mean, it's tragic that he's no longer with us, but yeah.
Well, you've picked it up and you're carrying the work on. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I really just want to thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, Paul Levy, awakeninthedream.com. Thanks for being with me today, Paul. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey at lisabonnice.com. In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924. Disaster struck. 3 explosions trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabonnice.com.